so excited to have you here today for our Nutrition is Rad event. And I'm even more excited because joining us today is Rachel Rothman, a pediatric dietitian, and we are beyond thrilled to have her here with us to help us think through how we can help our picky eaters. How can we help kiddos have a healthy relationship with food? I know I need lots of tips, so I'm really excited to dig in and talk to her. So welcome, Rachel. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Whitney. I am so excited to be chatting with you.
Yeah, well, would you like to sort of introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself for our audience.
Sure. So my name is Rachel. I'm a pediatric dietitian, and I have a private practice in nutrition here in San Diego. My practice is called Nutrition in Bloom. And within my practice, I really help parents help feed their kids. So I do one-on-one counseling. I lead some coaching groups. I have some online courses. And my whole goal is to help kids form a healthy relationship with food. And what I mean by that is wanting them to have positive experiences when it comes to eating, wanting them to have internal motivation to try new foods and to eat new foods. So, and at the same time, my other goal is to really help parents and caregivers just feel confident in how they feed and how they can make meal times happy for everybody.
I love that. Well, and that's our goal. Our whole goal today for our whole event today is really to help foster those sort of positive ideas and positive relationships with food. And so I think you're going to bring some wonderful ideas and tips for our families out there. I know I can use some tips. So I am the mom of a 2-year-old, almost 3, and I have another little one on the way. And so I've been trying to think, a lot about lessons I've learned already in the short sort of 3 years I've been a mom. And one of the things that has sort of been something particularly recently that I've been sort of navigating is my little one loves hot dogs. She loves French fries. Those are her favorite kinds of food. And, she's also so much more verbal now that she has some autonomy and she's making more decisions. And so we're wanting to give her choices, but her choices always seem at food time to lead to I want hot dogs. I want French fries, which we know cannot be the things that she has all of the time. And so I guess I'm just wondering if you have sort of ideas or tips and tricks to sort of help kiddos try new food and have a positive mindset around trying the things that aren't maybe hot dogs and aren't maybe French fries.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I first want to say that that's really normal, really common for kids to kind of go through this picky or selective eating phase. Okay. Typically around 1 or 2 years of age, their language is growing. They're developing the sense of autonomy. They're becoming more independent, which from a developmental standpoint is really great. Like that's what we want. But when it comes to food, it can be really challenging in general too. Yes. So I have at home, I didn't mention this. I have a 3.5-year-old and a 6-year-old. So I'm, right there in it with you in terms of when it comes to feeding. So I think what we have to first remember is really like our place in the role of feeding. And why I find feeding can sometimes be so challenging for parents is, we want our kids to eat. We want them, and rightfully so, we want them to meet their nutrition needs, to be growing, to get what their body needs. But at the end of the day, it's our kids who have the ultimate authority as to what they put into their body. And we want to try to do that in a way where we can help develop their sense of autonomy. So the first thing to think about, I think, is this concept, like a big concept by a woman. Her name's Ellen Satter. She's a pediatric dietitian and family therapist. And she talks about something called the division of responsibility. And what she talks about, and there's been lots of research on this, is that parents are responsible for the what, the when, and the where of mealtime. And children are responsible for the how much and the whether of eating. So what that means is that as parents, I use the phrase, what's on the menu. That's what I use to basically say, here's what's on the menu. Like here, we're having it at the table. We're having it, it's breakfast time. But we let our kids decide how much they're going to eat and if they're going to eat that food. So what that kind of does is hopefully takes like some of that head, that butting out of it where we're providing the food, but giving our kids a choice whether they eat that food or not. Does that piece make sense?
It does, especially, I think I consider myself a pretty type A person. And so I am definitely someone who likes to be in control. And I think that knowing that there are things, that I can control sort of what she is offered to eat is, I think, some sort of refreshing, because I think that's been the thing that has been a tension for me is how much do I give her control of what it is that she's choosing. Because I also want her to have a healthy relationship with food. So I haven't wanted to take that choice away. And so I like the idea of it sort of, I offer what you can have, but you choose how much you eat. And I guess my follow-up question to that is, what, if she chooses to eat none of it, is that something that's okay too? And should I be worried about that? Sort of, what do you do in that instance?
Absolutely. Good question. And I will say, just to backtrack a little bit, when it comes to the what, I wouldn't recommend, giving your child some like fancy, fancy meal that they've never eaten before, that they don't like, or something like that. And I work with, one of my specialty areas is working with kids who are extremely selective or extremely picky. So what we have to really do is focus on what they will eat.
Okay.
So when it comes to the what, to still be thinking about, making sure you are offering something that that they've liked or have eaten in the past.
Okay.
It doesn't mean that all the food has to be all of their favorites.
Mm-hmm.
But with that, if they don't, let's say they don't eat anything at mealtime, that's okay. There's going to be another meal in another couple of hours. So being okay with them not eating, as long as you're providing that food where it's, food that that they like. So what this idea is really doing is taking out this pressure piece that parents feel.
Yes.
It's really not our job to get our kids to eat. That's their job. We want them to be able to control their hunger and satiety. And I hope I'm making the point across too, that I'm not saying starve your child, or if they don't nothing. Because I know some parents get that advice, which I don't think is the best approach at all. I think we really have to meet them where they're at and what their current preferences are. And then we can kind of go from there. So does that make sense?
It does. And I really like what you said about, don't give all new things at once, sort of mix them up. So this is something that's familiar, and that I know I like the apples. Maybe I haven't tried this chicken before, but at least then there's sort of this apple on the plate that is something that maybe I want to try. And so I think that approach is also refreshing. And to be quite honest, you're right about the pressure piece. I think that that's something, I feel constantly. I'm sure other families out there feel as well, as wanting to make sure that their kiddos are fed and healthy and aren't missing that. And so I appreciate you sort of sharing, it's okay if they don't eat something in an instance. It sort of lifts that pressure a little bit off of that. That's an okay thing to have happen too.
And I think that, I will say that when I work with a lot of families, we work on this mindset piece, from a parent's perspective. So it's so much easier said than done. For me to just say, Whitney, at your next meal, just take the pressure off yourself. Yep. But when you're in that mealtime, it's much harder to do. So, to also just kind of give yourself some grace around this topic. But just to start to kind of plant that seed of kind of them and what their responsibility is.
Yeah, I love that. And, another thing that you said, Rachel, that also is sort of lifting that pressure a little bit and helping me think about giving myself a little bit more grace, is that you said that it's, fairly common and developmentally completely appropriate for kids to have sort of, these not fixations, but their preferences, and be a little bit picky about certain things. And is there sort of a certain age that kiddos grow out of that? Is that something that sticks around forever? I would just be curious to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I will say what's kind of typical, and, it's so hard to use that word, because I find that there's really a spectrum when it comes to picky, and I don't even like the word picky. I use selective eating.
Okay.
But sometimes it starts around 1 or 2 years of age, and it can go on for maybe a year or two. Sometimes around 4 or 5 kids do grow out of it. But what I will say is there are sometimes there are other things going on that make feeding more challenging. For a child maybe who has a more rigid personality, or who maybe has some sensory challenges going on, where they're sensitive to certain textures. We sometimes forget that feeding is it's a sensory experience with all of our senses. So, if parents are wondering is this typical? Is this not? That's kind of what I do and what I help with. So I know we'll include my email address. People are welcome to contact me, and ask questions. But there is kind of help and guidance and things that you can do to make everybody's life easier. So.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. And, it's interesting to you talking about food being a sensory experience. That is so true, with sort of the different textures in food. And that does make sense as something that could be, a little exciting or disconcerting for a little person, is sort of that new texture that they're experiencing. That's not really something I've thought of before. And so I think that that's a really interesting flag as well. Rachel, one thing that is also, this is sort of making me think about is we also, I have a toddler, so snacks are still a thing that are happening. Even without a toddler, I snack. Is there sort of a thing as too much snacking? Because that's another sort of worry that I sometimes have, is that she'll eat a ton of her, apple snack, but then not eat her dinner time. And so I wonder, is that an okay thing? Should I be emphasizing one time of the day over the other? Is there such thing as too much snacking?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I will say I get this question a lot from parents who are feeling concerned with too much snacking. And I think that we've kind of created this like connotation around snacking that it's not a good thing or that it has to be a certain thing. But what I like to kind of step back and just look at the big picture of eating and thinking about, usually for kids, especially like toddler age, they need to eat every like around 2 to 3 hours would be like a typical approach. So what I would think about is creating some kind of routine around eating.
Okay.
And a lot of times I use this gas tank analogy. So if we think about a gas tank, if we're constantly topping off the gas tank, constantly filling it with gas, we're never allowing it to completely empty so that we can fill it up again.
Yeah.
And the same goes for the stomach. If we're not allowing, kids to digest their food so then we can fill it up again, we're not going to, we're teaching them hunger. And it's not that we're trying to like starve them or anything, but it's more that we're teaching them this routine. So what I usually recommend is like breakfast, maybe a morning snack, lunch, afternoon snack, dinner, and then maybe a bedtime snack, depending on your bedtime. And what, again, you're responsible for the what. So you decide what you're offering at snack times. And, some kids like mid-morning, they're hungry. So they eat a lot at a mid-morning snack and might not eat as much as at lunch. And that's okay. We want to really, that division of responsibility, we want to honor their hunger and let them choose. So if they, let's say, I don't know, like crackers and cheese are on the menu for a snack and they eat a ton of that, we don't necessarily want to stop them and say like, no, you're not going to be hungry for lunch. We want to honor that. And then if they're not as hungry for lunch, like that's okay too. So
I love that. That really does, again, that pressure I feel like is lifting with each sort of thing that you say. But I think that also helps in that it's okay if snack is maybe where, my little one has filled herself up one day, it might be lunch another day. And it's okay if lunchtime doesn't have, every single thing on the plate eaten or anything like that. And it's okay if snacks sort of took the place of that. So I appreciate that as, again, just sort of that pressure lifting around when things have to happen. Because I think that that's definitely something that I know I've put on myself as a parent.
Absolutely. And I think, sometimes us as parents can get really fixated on like one particular meal or one particular snack. I notice a lot of times it's dinner. We're like so concerned with dinner, but we forget that, we have 5 to 6 opportunities to feed our kids throughout the day, and dinner might be a smaller meal, and that's okay. When I work with families, I'll look at their child from a nutrition standpoint. And sometimes I'll have them fill out a food record for like 3 days, even sometimes 7 days, because like one meal or even one day doesn't make or break nutrition. We have to look at it like over a period of time to really see how they're doing.
That's a really nice holistic approach too, to think of it as, like you said, not just one moment, but sort of the whole course of a couple days, a week, a whole sort of mindset around food, not just the one instance of eating. Yes. Rachel, at the museum, we believe in learning through play, and play is sort of the thing that guides all of our interactions with kiddos. We think that there's so much kids can explore and learn on their own through playing. And so I'm wondering if there is any connection between play with healthy eating habits too. And if there's sort of anything that, play that can happen while you're eating. Are there strategies that can help with play, help kiddos form a healthy relationship with food?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I want to talk about 2 quick things, like one is within mealtime and then one is outside of mealtime. Okay. So I think that sometimes like the try new food piece where we want kids to eat new foods, we want them to, we're serving the broccoli. I always use broccoli as my example. A bite of that broccoli immediately. But what I encourage parents to think about is when your child is trying something new, think about it as a long-term goal, because we want them, we want them to have that internal motivation to eat that food, not because they're forced to, or because they have to eat it before they get up from the table, or, eat it and you get dessert, because that's not necessarily teaching them in the future. Like, we want them to, be adults and like eat the broccoli on their own, right? Not So this idea of play surrounding trying new foods, I think, is one of the most important pieces.
Okay.
And what I mean by that, at mealtime is more like a sensory experience. So when you're giving them a new food, to also remember for parents that it can take like 15 to 20 exposures of a food before your child eats it, but to think about exposures and interaction. So, and think about those as feeding wins. So like a food play example, might be at the dinner table, instead of, asking your child to take a bite of broccoli, maybe you pick up the broccoli and you feel it and you say, ooh, that broccoli's kind of bumpy. How does it feel when you touch it? Or like, ooh, when I put this on my tongue, it kind of tickles. Does it tickle you? And to just remember, there's many steps to eating. There's a feeding therapist. Her name's Kay Toomey. She has something called the steps to eating. And she talks about how for a lot of kids, they might need to go through many steps before they're going to eat a food. So that might be like tolerating the food on their plate and then touching it and then picking it up and smelling it. And for some kids, especially those that might be a little bit more selective, they might have a harder time, even touching a food. So they might just need to see the food for a while or tolerate the food. So just to remember that, like when it comes to mealtime and trying new foods, that all of those interactions and exposures, like those are important steps to get to try new foods.
Yeah.
So that's like that first piece. Does that make sense?
It does. And that really connects again to sort of, I think, it makes me think about how we at the museum approach sort of learning and approach plays. It's about these exposures, and it's about engaging with multiple senses. And maybe the first time you're trying, an exhibit, it's in one way, but the next time you come and you do a little bit more. And so I really like that connection to food, is that it's like a stair step approach, as opposed to you've tried it, now you've mastered it. It's more about sort of getting comfortable with it, exploring the different aspects of it. And I haven't really thought about food that way before. So that's really interesting.
Absolutely. And even thinking about it like outside of the table and outside of mealtime. I think sometimes, especially dinner time, like we're stressed, our kids have had a long day, like, they're kind of crazy. So if we can think about, well, how can we have fun with food maybe throughout the day that has nothing to do with actual dinner time? And that might be like, and maybe if your kiddo doesn't want to taste some things, maybe you do a crunch test where you take like a carrot and celery and cucumber and everybody crunches it. And you say, okay, which has the loudest crunch? Or you feel it, which is the smoothest. Or like getting them in the kitchen and maybe they don't want to eat salad at the dinner table, but maybe they're willing to like break up the lettuce and they might surprise you. And because there's no pressure, they might like lick a piece of lettuce or try a piece of so those exposures, and even, or maybe like taking it outside and having an afternoon activity where you're like making juice with food, or, just doing these little things. And it doesn't have to be like a huge, hour long anything. It can just be like a little bit of exposure to move them forward and just making it a positive experience.
That's great. I love the idea of like food, and your relationship with food doesn't happen just at mealtime. It can happen, like you said, outside in a garden. It can happen just by playing with food as sort of, whether you're sorting or colors or just exploring the food in general or cooking. There's a lot of opportunities to play with food, which is, I think, a really nice way to think about it, and not a way that I've necessarily framed it for myself as a parent before either. So that's great. And I think definitely something that I know I will try on at home a little bit more too. So I love that idea. And I think that definitely opens up opportunities for families to sort of engage with food in a lot of different contexts with what works with their schedule too.
Absolutely. And I think, even like the kids in the kitchen idea, like sometimes I talk to parents and they're like, well, I just want to get dinner on the table. I don't want my child. And then that's fine. Then don't have them in the kitchen, and then find something else that works. It doesn't have to be, sometimes I think of like the Pinterest perfect, where we're like, it needs to be like pretty and colorful, but it doesn't have to be like that. It can be taking 5 minutes out of your day or 2 minutes, just to do a little something, because those exposures, those interactions, that's what's going to lead to that long-term goal of having them try new food. And if we can think of those like little exposures and interactions as feeding wins, it can help change our mindset and to kind of put us into a more positive frame of mind when it comes to feeding.
100%. I think that I have learned so much already today from you, Rachel. I'm really excited to try some things on. I think, I went into this thinking I would learn a lot about how to foster a positive mindset for my little one, but I think I've also learned a lot about how to foster maybe a more positive mindset for me as a parent of a little one with food. So I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. I'm sure just like me, I'm sure lots of people out there have learned a lot too. Is there anything else you'd like to share with everyone before sort of we sign off for the day?
Yeah, so I'll just share, I have so many more tips and information. I have a free guide. It's called 4 Steps to Help Your Little Ones Try New Food. So I think you guys will probably link to that, but it's kind of filled with some of the tips we talked about here, and then it goes a little bit deeper. And then for parents that might be struggling or, have questions, I have an online course and community. It's called Conquering Mealtimes, where we really dive into this stuff. I offer free 15-minute introductory calls. So contact me however you want, but I love talking about this stuff and trying to help parents figure out what kind of support can we get you so that you feel better and that you can just take this stuff with you for life. So yeah.
I love it. Well, we'll definitely make sure that we link all of the resources in the comments and things so that people can be in touch with their own questions for you, Rachel. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed learning with you today. And thank you all for tuning in to our special Parenting on the Go event for our Nutrition is Rad Day. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Rachel.
You. Bye.
Bye.